I want you to imagine for a second what it would be like if The Secret Life of Blossom was done right. Now what if I told you that the Squashening is just that? Would you believe me? Probably not, right? I mean, how could an episode about Blossom joining clubs have anything to do with telling scary stories to a giant talking squash? Well, when I call this The Secret Life of Blossom done right, I'm not referring to morals or character development. I more so mean it in the way that episodes are structured. Like Secret Life, this episode is built around a similar framing method of storytelling that consists of 3 smaller stories told within one bigger general narrative. But the difference between the Squashening and Secret Life is that in the former, these events actually mean something. There's payoff in the end. If you recall in my review of The Secret Life of Blossom, Powerpuff, I had mentioned that the entire point of the episode felt rather moot because none of the stories that were told through Blossom's imagination ended up meaning anything in the grand scheme of things. All 3 possible outcomes didn't affect her decision in the end, and instead we got a half-assed 180-degree turnaround that didn't make much sense at all for what had been built up before the climax. The Squashening actually gives a resounding conclusion at the end, although whether or not it was satisfying isn't going to be revealed until we get to that part of the review. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Oh, and if you're watching this in October, then happy Halloween! This episode review is the one for you. And if you're not watching it in October, then, fuck, I don't know, just watch it. Our story begins with Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup going trick-or-treating around their local neighborhood in search of houses that they can score some sweet candy goodness at before the night is up. Bubbles has decided to go as a cute little penguin, Buttercup is a skeleton Viking, I don't care what she calls herself, and Blossom is a famous mathematician some of you probably have never heard of, but is actually a pretty important historical figure, Ada Lovelace. You guys are going to love this. So who is Ada Lovelace exactly? Well, she was a popular mathematician who lived during the 19th century and achieved many great things during her lifetime, although she is most notably known as the first person to realize that the analytical engine was capable of running algorithms useful for various applications. You may not completely understand what I mean by that, but once I put it into layman's terms, it'll actually become quite clear. See, the modern day term used for the analytical engine is the mechanical computer. That's right, the computer. Ada Lovelace is widely regarded by historians and mathematicians everywhere as the world's very first computer programmer. You mean to tell me that Bubbles, the established computer programmer of the group, didn't go as the world's first computer programmer and instead chose a cute little penguin, but that Blossom did? What kind of sense does that make? I thought Bubbles was supposed to be the programmer character in this show. Why is Blossom, a character that doesn't know how to program, going as a computer programmer for Halloween? During my review of Cheap Thrills, I had mentioned that I disliked Blossom having an interest in moderating internet forums because it made it seem like she had too similar a character trait to Bubbles. Now, I realized that looking back at that video, I wasn't entirely clear on what I had meant, so allow me to try and re-explain my point there with this new knowledge we now know from this episode right here. I realize that computer programming and forum moderating are 2 different things. They require different skill sets and knowledge in order to perform. However, both of these things act as interests that show that the girls have a love for technology. Evidence indicates right here that Blossom also has an interest in programming despite previous episodes showing us otherwise. Yes, Ada Lovelace was more than just a computer programmer. She was a mathematician. But considering the fact that it is her major call to fame, it's the first thing that will jump into people's minds when somebody mentions her by name. And furthermore, computer programmers need to be smart. I'm not trying to stereotype here, but a certain level of intelligence and logical thinking skills are kinda necessary for computer programmers to be good at their jobs. Blossom here is the perfect fit for being a computer programmer because she is shown to care about school all the damn time. She places heavy emphasis on being organized and doing things methodically. She has 19-point plans that she demands to be followed down to a T. These are traits that a programmer character would have. Bubbles, on the other hand, is constantly failing her tests because in this reboot she's treated as a dumb blonde character. And, FYI, computer programmers aren't dumb. They're very strong and intelligent analytical thinkers, something that Bubbles is shown not to be. The fact that Blossom fits this bill, that she is very organized and logical, that she is smart, that she knows a lot about technology, is why I firmly stand by the fact that she was meant to be the programmer in this show, not Bubbles. So in the end, all this really creates is inconsistency. Blossom seems to be getting very aggravated by the fact that nobody has been getting her costume though, as she proceeds to complain to her sisters because she thinks the world revolves around her. Nevertheless, Buttercup is right there with her.
I hear you, sister. Nobody's getting my costume either. Everyone thinks I'm a skeleton.
Wait, you're not?
No, I'm Sergeant Bones.
Which sounds like the name for a skeleton. Right. Bubbles decides to go right on ahead and eat all of the candy that the girls had accrued over the night, leading them to want to find more candy while the night's still young. They decide to hit up this one spooky house on the hill, despite the fact that the porch light isn't on, for their next batch of candy, stating,
What could go wrong?
absolutely nothing. The girls go up to the house, find it's deserted, get the candy, celebrate happily, Mojo shows up, and the episode concludes. That's the end of my review. I'll take my check now, and I'll see you all next time. You didn't think I was serious, did you? No, unfortunately, there's still 9 more minutes of this episode to get through. This is really what happens.
What could go wrong?
I don't like where this is going. So the girls actually end up getting wrapped up by this squash monster who's pissed at Buttercup for stealing the entire bowl full of candy instead of taking just one like she was supposed to. Yeah, by the way, I'm with the Squash on this one. Fuck the kids who pull that shit. Honestly, we need to make candy communism a law. Okay, so despite the fact that this is another instance of the girls being stuck in a situation they could easily get out of because, you know, they have superpowers, this spaghetti squash, who I'm just going to call Tony because that's what he's called later in the episode, is upset because he's tired of his kind getting neglected on Halloween. He's jealous of pumpkins getting the spotlight, what with them having their insides extracted for human consumption and their corpses used as decorative porch ornaments. Doesn't sound like anything to be jealous of if you ask me. Basically, Tony threatens to kill the girls, but they convince him to let them go if one of them manages to tell a scary story for some reason. Sure, let's just roll with it. Buttercup is up first with her story, in which she presents us with Night of the Living Bread, an obvious parody of the famous theatrical film. Too bad somebody else already beat them to it. It's your basic zombie bread apocalypse story here. Buttercup's the badass expert who knows how to take down all the infected comestibles, Bubbles is the young apprentice who's learning how to defend herself as they survive, and Blossom is the red shirt that dies right after she's introduced. Oh, wait, that was a Star Trek reference, my bad. The three of them plan to escape to the roof in order to avoid the zombie bread slices headed towards them before it's too late, but things aren't looking too good for them.
Previously on AMC's The Walking Dead.
The walking bread are coming!
Correction, Bubs. They're already here.
Stop looking at me. What, never seen a bandicoot before?
One detail I can compliment this scene for doing is making it apparent that it is being told from Buttercup's perspective. She makes herself appear as this fantastical version of herself that can do just about anything. She purposely gives Blossom lines while telling the story that demean her in comparison, like she's been known to do to her sister in the past episodes.
And all of my plans are complicated and annoying!
Typical Blossom.
Blossom normally wouldn't say that. Buttercup would say that about her. These stories don't forget who's telling it, and little things like that indicate it as such. It's a nice detail. Speaking of Blossom, she somehow gets herself infected off screen, and we get to witness Buttercup killing her own sister, which is something I honestly never expected this show to do.
Come on, Bubs! We have to get to the chopper!
See, the reboot can get dark too, guys. This scene seems to overstay its welcome, given that we're treated to a lackluster action scene where Buttercup is constantly fighting off these bread zombies. I mean, yeah, when you think about it, she is legitimately killing all of these characters she used to know before they were zombies, but you pretty much get the point after she takes down the first one. After she takes out her sister, Buttercup and Bubbles find an opening to escape via a helicopter on the roof. But right before they can get out of there, a certain someone decides to show up and stand in their way.
Hello, Buttercup. Thanks for inviting me.
Ugh, enough! Introducing Dracula now?
It's a twist!
It's a hack move.
Tony is unimpressed with Buttercup's horrific storytelling, which means Blossom's up next with her own variation of a scary story, this one being heavily based upon the popular 19th century novel, Frankenstein. Something I forgot to mention earlier. Ada Lovelace was, believe it or not, the daughter of the famous romantic writer known as Lord Byron, a man famous for writing poems like Don Juan and for helping to inspire Mary Shelley's hit novel, Frankenstein. Isn't it crazy how connected this stuff is? I knew my 12th grade British literature course would come in handy someday. Care to take a guess as to what her parody version is titled? I bet you'll never see it coming.
I call this one Blossom Style.
Wow, you really changed it up there.
Yeah, not the most creative name if you ask me, but with a title like Frankenstein, I mean, it's not much to work with.
My dearest Jared, long and cold has been the winter in my heart since you shuffled off this mortal coil.
Oh no! Oh no! 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 Oh no! No! I don't wanna. No!
Just seeing this character show up now after the whole Jared situation puts a bad taste in my mouth. It'd be one thing if he only showed up in Snow Month and never again, but the fact that he is recurring over and over again just makes it a million times worse. Also, the phrase "shuffled off this mortal coil" is a Shakespearean reference to the "to be or not to be" soliloquy from Hamlet. I'm not sure what this is doing in a parody of a novel that came out centuries later, seeing as it never appears in the original Frankenstein. Once again, thank you 12th grade British literature. Blossom proceeds to bring the one-dimensional piece of cardboard back to life via an electrical generator and the help of her Cyclops assistant, Bigor. And so once again, the day is saved. Jared is being represented as a character Blossom is obsessing over, despite the fact that there's nothing about him that explains this sort of behavior. He's just as unlikable as he's always been.
Blossom, good.
The townsfolk catch wind of Blossom's activities reanimating the dead, and they desire to put an end to the foul monster that she's created, just like 90% of the people who watch this show. They barge into Blossom's house and scare the monster into destroying her home, creating a mess of broken candles, open books, messy carpets, you name it.
Everything is a mess!
Sorry if it got too dark there.
A messy house. Do you girls even know what scary is?
I've never related to a character more in this reboot than I have today. With two of the girls failing to impress Tony with their scary stories, everything is left up to Bubbles to give him the scare of his life. Her personal story, told in the form of what appears to be an unspecified daytime sitcom, is probably my favorite of the three for quite a number of reasons actually.
Tony was a spaghetti squash who had it all. A great job in the big city, a bicycle with 10 speeds, and an adorable puppy dog.
One thing I want to compliment this particular story for is the art direction, specifically with the heavily stylized backgrounds. The characters kind of clash with it in certain scenes, but as a whole, I like the different stylistic choice Bubbles has going on here instead of the last two, which just decided to place filters over everything. There's at least more of an effort to switch things up here, relatively speaking. Unfortunately for Tony here, he's lost his job after discovering the pumpkins were in for Halloween, and he begins to enter a deep depression until his friends, who just so happen to be the Powerpuff Girls for some reason, show up and help him out through his predicament. Blossom ends up telling Tony not to let others define his happiness for him, a nice small mini lesson that was included during this couch scene, which I can commend. But what's with Buttercup's voice here?
Come on, girl, you gotta get your groove back.
I have to say, this whole gourd to remember scenario is actually doing a decent job at feeling creative as opposed to the other two stories which were just plain old parodies with very little novelty to them. There's even a moment where the mayor goes to the girls for help because the city is in danger. I don't know how Tony suddenly grows to the size of a building, but regardless, he engages the colossal pumpkin in more ways than one, and the two end up falling in love together after a brief confrontation. The story ends with Bubbles concluding her tale with a happy ending for Tony and the pumpkin, and despite the fact that her story wasn't scary at all, the real Tony lets the girls go after he makes a major 180-degree turn that feels a little abrupt, but it's not too far-fetched. He admits that he secretly loves pumpkins and he's been pushing them away because he's actually scared of his feelings, and oh look, the bowl of candy's full again for some reason. Tony runs off screen to go find a jack-o'-lantern, and the episode ends with Mojo showing up in drag because that's funny apparently.
Surrender all your peony candy to Mojo Jojo! Great. Another Ada Lovelace?
Finally! Someone gets it!
Yeah, that wasn't the best note to end on. So, it's actually kind of funny. This episode, for me, follows the exact opposite trend that most of the reboot episodes have. Instead of diminishing during the third and final act, this episode didn't get interesting until that point. Bubbles' narration was easily the best part of the episode for me because it had style, it had a story, it was more creative than the other two, and it was charming. It's unfortunate that Bubbles' dream ends up getting the least amount of screen time in the Squashening because I would have loved to see more time spent fleshing out this lighthearted life story that the writers had come up with. Buttercup's zombie apocalypse tale dragged on for way too long, and Blossom's Frankenstein parody was played completely straight to the point where nothing set it apart from other parodies of the same thing, so it's just a shame that we didn't get more of Scary Story number 3. I think a solid minute to minute and a half could have been cut out from Buttercup's apocalypse, and maybe even some more time out of Blossom's to make room for Tony. I do, however, think it's a bit of a problem for this episode that the least Halloween-related thing was the best part of the Halloween special. Buttercup centered around zombies and Blossoms around Frankenstein, but Bubbles was all about daytime television. It is also a missed opportunity that this puppy version of Bubbles wasn't the same design as the one from Monkey See, Doggy Do. That would have been a cool reference. But, as I said, not thrilled with Night of the Living Bread or Blossomstein. Both of those could have been much better. I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but Regular Show actually did a similar thing where a bunch of the characters told scary stories for a Halloween special, each centering around what the characters that were telling the story found scary. I liked that special quite a bit actually, and it was charming to see another Cartoon Network show take a crack at the formula even if it didn't completely succeed. At least with Buttercup's story, I was convinced that it was something she would tell. It certainly fit her character's personality as it focused on interests Buttercup is into. Blossom on the other hand, well, it's the weakest link. 75% of that can be queued up to the fact that this tale involves Jared, and that's enough to already get things off to a bad start, but it's uninspired. Nothing in this tale signifies that it's taking place in the Powerpuff Girls. And same with Buttercup's for that matter. Nothing indicates that this is a Powerpuff Girls cartoon. This is just a generic chain of events that the majority of people already know because they've seen Frankenstein parodies a million times before. And it's a wasted opportunity because if these two had taken the same path as Bubbles, we might have gotten 3 unique, possibly creative stories out of it. Both of these stories do make sense in the context of Halloween, what with them being about zombies and Frankenstein respectively, and I get that, but don't reinvent the wheel, you know? The Squashening as a whole is still predominantly better than The Secret Life, as I had mentioned earlier, because we got character payoff in the end. Tony had a change of heart and learned to open up, albeit a bit rushed, and the girls got their Halloween candy they'd been searching for as a reward for helping him. Also, for a Halloween special, it was okay at best. There's better out there though.